Back in high school my junior year, I used to get to school about 15 minutes before it started. That's what time the bus would drop us off. After getting inside, I would head upstairs to my locker first. Then there was this spot upstairs near the stairs that had a large window at the end of the hall. It wasn't that far from my locker either, and you could sit on the ledge in front of the window. My friends and I would sit around there just about every day and talk. It was kind of a routine or a before-school hangout spot for us. It overlooked part of the parking lot and also the softball field next to the school to the east. We could also see the sun rising, and it lit up the inside really well. One day, I arrived at school, went upstairs to my locker, and then over to my friends by the window. There were about 5 of us or so there, and we chatted until the warning bell sounded. When it did, we all started to disperse to our classes. The hallways had been really crowded, but things were quickly becoming more quiet. I looked out the window and saw a few kids hurrying in at the last minute to make it to class. Then, I saw this one guy hurry into the school. He was too old to be a student, and I didn't recognize him as a teacher. I thought maybe he was a substitute at first, but he was not dressed for the part. He just wore an old, baggy-looking sweatshirt and sweatpants. He entered the school on the floor below, and then I headed to my class. I walked through the hallways down towards the other end. My classroom really wasn't that far away, and it was also on the second floor. As I got there, I noticed down at the end of the hallway, the same guy whom I had seen entering the school was now coming up to the top of the stairs. I went into my classroom at that point. Class went on as usual, as did my next few classes after that. Then came lunch period. I remember that as I was sitting with a couple of my friends at a table, I saw the guy again. He walked briefly into the lunchroom and then out another way. I was surprised to see him again, and I also thought that it was weird that I even noticed. The school that I went to was pretty large, with a lot of students, and it would be easy to blend in with a crowd. Later in the day, in my last hour, we were in class, and about halfway through, the phone in the classroom rang. Our teacher picked it up at the desk. Afterwards, he told us that the school was being locked down. We'd had to get up and move to the back end of the classroom. Then he locked the doors and turned out the lights to the classroom. We were all really confused. I didn't even think about the guy that I kept seeing around the school earlier. I was as clueless as everybody else. All of us in the class were talking to each other, wondering what was going on. Nobody knew though. The teacher wouldn't tell us either. He just said for us to keep calm and to be quiet. About an hour went by, and finally, the lockdown was lifted. We still didn't know what was going on. School was let out, and we all went home. I rode the bus, and when I got home, my mom was there and asked me about the lockdown. I guess she had heard more about it than I did. I found out that a man, the same one who I had seen multiple times in the school, was the cause of it. During the last class period of the day, he was seen suspiciously walking down a hallway. The school was then locked down, police were called, but unfortunately, the man was able to escape through an open window. Nobody knew who he was. I told my mom that I had seen the guy enter the school and had seen him again later multiple times. It blew my mind that the guy was able to fly under the radar for so long. He had been there since the start of the school day, but it wasn't until the last hour that anybody seemingly noticed him. I'm just glad that the guy didn't cause any harm. I don't know who he was or what he was doing. This story takes place years ago when I was in high school. It happened after the lunch period. The way my school worked is that we would have class, then lunch, then study hall. Class was an hour long, and lunch and study hall were about 25 minutes each. Your study hall classroom would be the same classroom that you had directly before lunch. But for me, I had gym class that period. It was 10th grade PE. The class was very easy and enjoyable for me. When we would have study hall though, we would have to use a different teacher's classroom who had prep hour at that time. But a couple of times, we were unable to get the classroom and then had to spend study hall in the gym, which was kind of weird. If that happened, we would sit in the bleachers or on the gym floor and do homework. Usually, the teacher would let us know before we went to lunch where it would be, and most of the time we had a certain classroom. So, on this school day after lunch, I started heading back to the classroom. It was a decent ways away from the lunchroom on the other side of the school. I talked with some of my friends that I sat with at lunch for a while. My gym teacher was not very strict at all, especially with study hall. He didn't mind students coming back a minute or two late. The lunchroom cleared out, and I began walking back to class. The bell rang when I was still like a minute away. By then, the hallways were empty besides me walking them. Soon, I got to the classroom. The door was closed, which was odd, and when I tried opening it, I couldn't. The door was locked. I also noticed that inside the window, the lights appeared to be off. I turned and walked away, realizing that we must be meeting in the gym today. I hadn't known though. I remember thinking to myself, I don't remember being told that we were meeting in the gym. How did everybody else know besides me? I headed back towards the gym, and then I heard an announcement come over the school speakers. It said, "This is a lockdown, and this is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms, and no students are to be out in the halls." I was about halfway back to the gym at that point. It still hadn't registered to me that the classroom had been locked down. I hurried up and made my way to the gym. When I got there, the doors were closed and locked. It was in that moment that I realized they were meeting in the classroom. I know I was a little slow on that, but I headed back to the classroom, now walking as fast as I could without running. I hadn't heard or seen anybody else in the hallways at all. It was completely quiet until suddenly, I heard the sound of something hitting a locker around the corner. It was like somebody punched a locker or threw something up against it. The sound was very loud, especially to break the dead silence. I stopped in my tracks and no longer wanted to keep going to my classroom. I started walking in the other direction. In that moment, I heard footsteps coming from where I had heard the loud noise. My heart started racing. I kept walking and heard the footsteps continue. They were about to come around the corner now. I saw a staircase on the left and darted over and quickly went down the stairs. After getting down, I ran about 30 feet down the hallway to the first classroom that I saw. When I was there, I desperately started banging on the door. I didn't know what class this was, but I was hoping that they would let me in. After knocking a couple of times, I tried the door, but of course it was locked. The teacher was not answering. I hoped that there was actually a class going on in there currently. As I waited, I heard whoever had been behind me now walking down the stairs rather quickly. I looked back and saw their legs appearing, but couldn't tell who it was yet. I didn't want to know. I turned back and kept banging on the door. Then I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs and start walking towards me. All of a sudden, the classroom door finally opened. The teacher let me in and quickly shut the door once I was in the classroom. All of the lights were off, but I saw the students in the class were in the back of the room and on the floor. The teacher quickly locked the door, and then somebody actually tried opening it just a few seconds later. It must have been whoever had been following me. Then, they banged on the door a couple of times. The teacher looked out the little window and then turned back and walked away. Some students started talking quietly. One of them asked me where I had come from. The teacher stopped everyone and said for us to all be quiet. I remember things got really silent for a while. Then, she went back over to the door and looked out again. I think by then, the guy was gone. We remained locked down though for what felt like a really long time. I think it was almost an hour. Finally, the lockdown was lifted. I remember that I got called to the principal's office and had to answer some questions about what happened. They didn't really tell me much about the situation though. That was definitely the scariest moment of my time in high school. I don't know what would have happened if that person caught up with me. I don't want to know either. Back when I was in high school during my freshman and sophomore years, I would ride the bus. It picked me up at the corner of my street early in the morning and would drop me off afterwards. I went to an average-sized high school about 10 minutes away from where I lived. At least, the place seemed average to me. There were probably about 700 or 800 kids combined in all 4 grades. This is something that happened during my sophomore year. It was a school day just like any other to that point. One class had just ended, and I was going to my final class for the day. As I stood in the hallway near my locker, I talked with some of my friends. I had a decent friend group of several other guys. The locker comments were always really crowded in between classes, and I remember that the first warning bell rang. That meant that you had 2 minutes to make it to class. Kids started leaving the comments, but me and a couple of friends stayed. My classroom wasn't really that far off. I remember that one of the guys there was a grade ahead of us, and his name was Jake. His brother was Tommy, and Tommy was in my friend group, so I think that's why he was there. As I was about to head to class, I heard another sound come over the school speakers. At first, I was thinking, how could the bell ring again so soon? But it wasn't really the same bell sound for when class starts. It was followed by an announcement over to the intercom. We were told that the school was going into a lockdown. All of us should go to our next hour classes immediately, and the teachers should lock the doors and turn off the lights. There was still kind of a lot of kids around, including the 4 of my friends. I heard one of them say they were going to just leave. Nobody wanted to sit in the classroom for who knows how long during a lockdown. One of the school exit doors was not that far away. There were already some kids leaving. I saw about 10 kids running for the doors and going outside, and more followed. There was only one class period left for the day, so I decided that I wanted to leave as well. But I didn't drive there. That's when Jake asked me if I wanted to leave. He said that he would give a ride home to anybody that wanted to because he was leaving. As he said this, he started to walk away. Half of my friend group was leaving, and the other half were actually going to their classes. Other kids were also leaving, and it became chaos. We had to leave fast if we were going to. I saw one of the teachers enter the hallway and start to tell kids to get to their classes. There were fewer and fewer kids around by the second. I decided to leave, but by that point, Jake and my other friends had already left. I remember the teacher yelling at the kids to stop leaving. There were probably like 50 that ended up making it out of the school. I was one of them, and when I got outside, my friends and I did not do a good job sticking together. Kids were literally running away to leave. They were going to the parking lots where students parked mostly, and some ran off through the grass towards a nearby neighborhood. The school was in an area that was mostly residential, but there were a few businesses down the road. There was a woods and all of the sports fields behind the school. The student parking lots were on the side, and then one was behind the tennis courts. When I got outside, I couldn't even see Jake or my friends anymore. It was basically chaos. Kids were running everywhere. A teacher took a step out of the school and told us all to come back inside, but nobody listened to him. I figured that Jake and my friends would be in the parking lot, so I ran in that direction. I had to kind of go around the school to get there though. I wasn't sure which parking lot Jake parked in, so I went to the main one first. When I got there, he was nowhere in sight. I realized that it must be the other one, and I hoped that I wasn't too late. By now, most kids had made it to their cars if they were leaving. I sprinted for the other parking lot, but it was a ways away. When I got there, there was nobody. A lot of cars were still there, but I didn't see any students at all. I walked around hoping that maybe my friends were in their car but hadn't left yet. Unfortunately, though, I didn't see them. I realized that they must have left without me. Now, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back to the school because it was probably locked, and I wasn't supposed to leave in the first place. But I also couldn't go home because it was too far to walk, and I didn't have a car. I started walking back up closer to the school, not really knowing exactly what I was going to do. I got to a back door of the school and tried going inside, but it was locked, just like I figured it would be. After this, I was going to go back around to the parking lot and then walk down the sidewalk. But when I turned, I saw some guy coming out of the school. I just knew that this guy had to be the reason for the lockdown. He was looking over his shoulder, was way too old to be a student, and definitely not a teacher. I was a long way away from him, and I quickly ran behind a tree that was nearby. I was just hoping that the guy didn't see me. For a few seconds, I didn't bother to look and see where the guy was. I was expecting him to walk in another direction, but as I was still behind the tree, I heard the guy walking closer. I ran from behind the tree to the woods, which was maybe 20 feet away. There was no question that the guy saw me running into the woods. I was hoping that he wouldn't follow me. I got inside, went about 20 feet deep in it, and then ducked down and hid. I had no clue why the school had been locked down up until that point. I had been more concerned about leaving with my friends. After seeing a suspicious guy leave the school, though, I realized that I might be in actual danger. For a few seconds, I didn't hear anything until I heard footsteps in the grass right outside of the woods that I was in. I couldn't take it any longer, and I got up and started running. I ran through the woods and then to the left. I didn't hear the guy enter the woods or anything, but I just wanted to get out of there. After like 2 or 3 minutes of running, I reached the edge of the woods, kind of near the street. I walked through the grass to the sidewalk and then ran down it. I kept going until I eventually reached a gas station. When I got there, I asked the employee working if I could borrow his cell phone to call my mom. I told him how my school had been locked down and everything. He let me, and I was able to wait there until my mom came and picked me up. Luckily, she worked not too far away from the school and our house. I was able to leave work without a problem. I didn't get in trouble for leaving school early either. The lockdown ended up lasting for the entire class period. In fact, students were kept there almost 10 minutes after the regularly scheduled time that school got out. So, I didn't miss any class or anything. The man that I saw had entered the school trying to pick up his daughter. It was a situation where he was divorced and hadn't seen his daughter in a long time and didn't have custody of her. He was also drunk and threatened a custodian when asked to leave. I'm not sure why he came over to me when I was in the woods though. It was a really scary situation for me.